Lisa.
Good morning, everybody. If everybody could turn cameras on, that'd be great for discussion. All right, so thanks for coming back. Sorry for the hiatus while I could not get out of the hospital, but it's good to see all of you again. And this is going to be our last session, actually. So thank you, everybody, for participating for the last couple of months. It's been really good to get to hear all of your perspectives and get to share something or two things that I love, psychiatry and anime. So that's always fun to do. So it's been great having you guys participate. So let's see, it looks like a decent number of you guys are here so far. We might wait a couple more minutes. How's everybody wrapping up their semester? Everybody getting ready for finals and starting to get stressed out? All right, let's go ahead and get started. So for today, and you can hear my delightful sirens in the background. Okay. So episodes for today. I hope you guys enjoyed them. Does anybody have any thoughts? Liz.
Yeah, like when I was watching it, like the what's what I'm looking for? Like the conversations between how do you Akito? Is that how you pronounce?
Yeah.
Okay, and Yuki, like the kind of thing where like you'll never be saved, and like those like kind of like weird interactions, like that was kind of like interesting. And like Yuki at one point was like she like took away any light I met, like just stuff like that where I was like, this is really interesting. And then it was also kind of interesting to see, to like finally understand like kind of why Kyo the way he is a little, in terms of like his mom like passing away in an accident. We kind of see like that connection between Kyo and Toru, because they kind of like went through similar experiences, so they can like both empathize with each other. So those were just like some things that I noticed. But
yeah, definitely. It's good to get to kind of hear a little bit more about Kyo's past and his loss as well, and that like bonding kind of ability between the two of them with that. But yeah, certainly the dynamic between Yuki and Akito is an interesting one, and I wish we had many more sessions to explore Akito. Becomes a very interesting and very negative and tough character to work with. And we start to see the beginnings of that now and kind of the effect it's had on Yuki, for sure. Did anybody else notice anything?
Yeah, I kind of felt like these past two episodes we saw like just how much Kyo has changed. Like I felt like his communication was a lot better, and he was like just more aware of like what was going on with other people. I mean, specifically Toru, but
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. He was able to kind of notice a lot about like interactions between other people. Like when other people like Hiro were doing things that were maybe hurtful, he could really pick up on that very easily. So his kind of social awareness has really grown a lot. Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of fun to get to take a little bit of a interesting look at all the different characters, because we've kind of started to know them, all of them, and kind of watch their journey throughout this time. How about anybody else? How did we feel about Toru in this episode? Or 2 episodes?
Felt like when Hiro like said the one thing to her about always talking about her mom, she became very self-conscious about talking about that just in general now. And it felt like her just kind of bringing up past trauma, like, and not even just with her mom, but with her dad too, it seemed.
Yeah, maybe she was beginning to address some of that, like when she was kind of crying on like the patio porch, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it seems like she was finally maybe starting to address it a little, because she's just been pushing it so far back behind her. We noticed before she wasn't even able to confront it. And how about Yuki? Any thoughts on Yuki's behavior in this? Well, first I'll ask, how many of you, raise of hands, watched with the subtitles? Okay. And so I'm assuming the rest of you watched with the dubs. So there was an interesting kind of difference in the second episode of the subtitled versus the dub. And obviously I wouldn't have expected you guys to watch both of them to find out the difference. But there was one moment that I want to discuss later, and we'll see which of you might have noticed it in the subtitled version. But any thoughts on Yuki so far?
Sort of feels like he's finally or starting to come to like terms with it, or like kind of accepts what happened in the past with him and Akito and trying to grow from it. I don't know that he's like he's not recovered from it all, but I mean, he's opening up to Toru about it now too, and about like what happened with them in their past, that Toru didn't even know it was him, giving the hat back, and like how she was the first one to save him.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like he had a lot in his past that he has really been struggling with kind of on the inside, and has yet to really confront. So I think that's an interesting thing that we get to see with Yuki this time. Okay. So my thoughts on this, where I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on whether we think Yuki might have PTSD. We've kind of learned sort of slowly about his trauma, and we really kind of get to see a lot more flashbacks in this episode. So I think we could maybe discuss PTSD and see where we end up of thinking about, might he have this? He certainly has the trauma. We've seen him being kind of locked in a dark room and kept away from others during a very formative time in his life. So I'd like to explore this with you guys today. I agree. I think that he does have some of those distressing memories. And keep in mind that for this specific criteria, you only need one of these. So it can be either those distressing memories. It can also be distressing dreams. I don't think we see that for him. Some of the dissociative reactions and like flashbacks. And that's something that one of the later groups can talk about a bit more. But also like the prolonged psychological distress at any exposure. And I think that this can be interesting, and we see this in some of like the earlier episodes, anytime that he has encountered or discussions have arisen about Akito, he does seem to be quite affected in those moments. But this is kind of asking you guys to remember episodes that we watched like a month ago. So I understand if you don't quite pull that out. I have seen these episodes many times. So yeah, I think that it's always good to kind of remember sometimes that even with these criteria, you're having a few different categories and really just needing kind of like one from each for this. All right, the next room, room 3.
Yeah, so we were talking about how Yuki kind of, I mean, just the fact that he's living with Shigure is kind of avoiding the like kind of Soma family house and Akito in general. But I wasn't sure how much that kind of applies now, because I feel like originally that might have been his reason to live there, but now like he's met Toru and he kind of living a better life. He's not so like down on himself. So I don't know if he's really persistently avoiding it or putting much effort into avoiding it. I mean, we mentioned, I think Hattori showed up at the school festival and he was kind of taken aback by that because he's like, oh, you're usually with Akito. But again, like he wasn't really trying to avoid it much, like wasn't putting much effort into that. But conversations about like Akito, you could tell like he has some like disposition against talking about it. He doesn't feel too comfortable about it in general, but
Yeah, certainly. I think we have seen him progressing over the course of the episodes that we've watched, where it does seem like originally him moving to the house was a very significant effort to avoid the Soma family, to avoid Akito, to avoid reminders or being even associated with kind of that past trauma. And then now we've kind of seen where he's a little bit more willing to engage. Though even in the second episode, when everybody else goes to the house, it seems like after that one interaction with Akito in the beginning, he has just been kind of wandering around on the beach and not even going to meet everybody else, and everybody else goes to the house. So maybe still doing some avoidance behaviors. And trying to work through those. And it sounds like Toru has been helping him, but that's not the kind of thing that you can overcome too quickly, right? Yeah. Okay. Next room for criteria D. So room 4.
So our group talked about how Yuki was afraid to go to school, and that can show diminished interest or participation in significant activities. So that's just an example of one of those. And then the feelings of detachment or estrangement from others. We talked about how he doesn't really have a lot of close friends except for like Toru or like the people that he lives with, but he doesn't really have other friends. Like he gets like a lot of attention at school for his looks and everything, but he doesn't have other friends that are close. And then also like his past trauma of like his parents. I'm not sure if it like his parents sold him or not, but like on that part I'm like confused. But this is basically what made him not want to stay at home. So now he like lives at the main house with Shigure.
Yeah, so it definitely seems like his parents, if not, selling him, sort of renting him out in a way, where, his parents were like receiving more financial support in exchange for him kind of being at the beck and call of the family head. And that, certainly would be kind of a traumatic experience of losing your parents. And so, I agree with you that detachment and estrangement from others is like kind of a screaming example for him where, even his brother, he feels like no real closeness to. So even his like close family, he doesn't feel a connection with. And like at school, we've talked about possibly having like a social anxiety disorder because he keeps people at this like very, distance. Is that a detachment and estrangement? It does kind of seem like that could count. And then for some of the other things, I think that he does seem to have some of that negative emotional state that can be kind of persistent. And this is kind of where we talked about possibly a social anxiety disorder, where, he does kind of have a lot of like those negative emotions that are kind of sticking around. And the diminished interest in participation. We did see that at the beginning. He wasn't interested in participating in anything really. And then, as James pointed out, his interactions with Toru have kind of led him to progress a little. So now we've started to see him like joining the student council and being interested in maybe participating in certain things. So maybe he is kind of improving in some of these symptoms. And then sort of maybe even like the distorted cognitions of blaming himself. I think that is something that we would want to kind of keep an eye on with him, and that we kind of start to review with him in other episodes that you guys haven't watched yet. So I think you guys did a great of really picking out one of the main ones of that detachment. All right, next room, criteria E.
So we discussed this one. And so for the first one with his irritable behavior and angry outbursts, we feel like we don't really see that unless it's an interaction between Kyo and Yuki over like Toru. And then we don't really see like him being reckless or self-destructive, or and then his exaggerated startle response, we feel like was more in the beginning of the anime when we first started it, when it was his interactions with Toru or any girl, like he would have an exaggerated startle response. But I feel like now he is able to be around like other people, like other girls, and when he touches them, like nothing happens. We don't really see him having problems with concentrating, especially because he is a tutor for Toru. And then we also don't think he has any sleep disturbances or like falling asleep.
Yeah, I agree with you here. I think that for this one, the arousal and reactivity, we don't see as much with him. We might see some of that kind of the irritable with specifically with Kyo, but otherwise we don't see him being all that irritable. There was an episode, there was a moment in one of the episodes where, he's laying on the couch and he's like not feeling well. And he acts pretty irritable in that moment. But in general, we don't see a lot of it with him outside of his interaction with Kyo. So I agree with you. I don't know if he would meet these criteria. All right. And then just in general, we have to keep in mind for PTSD, that duration would be at least a month. So that's an important distinction, that these symptoms would have been going on for quite a while. For Yuki, I think that's not really something for us to be concerned with because he's had this trauma for quite some time, and any of the symptoms we would be looking at have been a bit persistent. But the disturbance causes the clinically significant distress or impairment, like most other diagnostic criteria, and not attributable to physiological effects of a substance or another medical condition. And also keep in mind that all of this diagnostic criteria has been specifically for children that are greater than 6 years old. So some of the other symptoms that you might find specifically for children is that the repetitive play may occur in which themes or aspects of the trauma are expressed. So focusing on like their play and what that looks like, because sometimes, children might have a hard time expressing that. And the frightening dreams they might just be frightened from their dreams, but not be able to recognize what the content is. And that trauma specific reenactment might occur in play. And then there are a few differences if you're looking at children that are less than 6 years old. So one of them is kind of what counts as trauma. So for that, it's not really like, it's not even just like close friends or something that learning the traumatic event might happen to like close family members. Is specifically like a parent or a caregiving figure. And then like I said before, even with children greater than 6, with children younger than 6, some of that intrusive memories, they don't necessarily come across as just like hearing a child talk about the memory. It might just be seen through their play. And you might just have like a constriction of play where they're not engaging in as much play or engaging as intensely and fully as you might see with another child, and they'll be socially withdrawn. So just some factors to keep in mind. And then we have our last group to discuss specifiers. If somebody from the group wouldn't mind speaking up for what specifiers might look like for this.
Sorry, yes, this is our slide. So let me just pull up my notes really quickly. So we did have like one question, if you could just like clarify. Like, we're kind of confused on like the difference between disassociative and depersonalization, because when we looked at it more, it was like talking about how it's like very detached and like, I don't know, like, we just wanted to clarify the difference between those.
Yeah, sure. So they're really, quite similar, honestly. But like, I think for like the depersonalization versus like derealization, I think the names kind of help with that. And so both of these are considered like dissociative symptoms. So both of those classic things that we're thinking of as dissociative, and then those are just like kind of subtle variations of like what you might see for dissociative.
Got it.
So for like the depersonalization, it's kind of like both of them can feel a bit like being in a dream in a way.
Yeah.
But so I think one is just more of like the person feels like very detached from it, like they're like it says, that outside observer, they're kind of like looking in a way. And then with the other one, it maybe was a little bit more like focused on what the world around is, more like dream-like. So not necessarily feeling pulled out of self, but like that the world is more dream-like. If that's kind of how I think.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, so obviously with like the time thing, it's a little hard to know, but like, but with like depersonalization, we kind of thought like when he was on like the beach, like he seemed very like detached, and then also like when he was like in the room with Akito, like he just seemed very like it was kind of like an out of body, like he was kind of just there, like he was like listening, but he wasn't really like actually there, like he wasn't like and like that can sometimes be like a coping mechanism, is to kind of just like stop all that emotion from coming through. So it's easier to be an outside observer. So I felt like those were two ones, like especially like when he was with Akito. And then for derealization, like we kind of looked at like when they're on the beach, like him and Toru, and like he sees the stars, and she's like, look at the stars, and he has like this whole thing. Like I felt like that was also kind of like very dreamlike and like distorted, kind of, because like at one point, like he was talking about how Akito like I put in like my notes, like take away any light I imagine. So it was just like very dark. I don't know, I felt like there was like some things going on with that, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. I agree with you. I think, and this was one of the things when you guys had to kind of address this, where there's a little bit of a difference between the subtitled version and the dubbed version, the English version, where in the English version, I noticed that when he's walking on the beach, they kind of they really kind of downplay it in a way where he's like, oh, I was just lost in thought. But, you know, when you see it in the subtitle version, it seems a bit more intense of what he's been going through, where he seems to have really kind of just been in this very dissociative state where hours have been going. You know, the other group, it's been like afternoon through like nighttime, where, you know, all of the other Soma family members have been at the house. Kyo and Toru have like gotten ingredients for pancakes, made pancakes, ate pancakes. And this whole time, Yuki has just sort of like been wandering on the beach just by himself in a way, and seems a bit out of it when he finally does encounter Toru. And I think that that is certainly a moment where, you know, we really would be a little bit scared for him of having that like depersonalization and derealization, that really dissociative state.
Yeah, especially because I feel like also like in previous episodes, like that one episode where they're like on the bridge, like he's typically very like, I feel like good about like articulating his feel, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Like for some reason that scene just comes to mind where they're like on the bridge and like talking about like, I forget, but like he just seems very in touch with his emotions. So like also if you look at that and kind of contrast it to like what we're seeing now, it's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. You would think that after hours and hours and hours of just kind of wandering, he would have more to say than to just kind of be jolted into reality by encountering her. So, you know, I think that that's something to keep in mind for him, and to remember that this can be one specifier for PTSD if that one is a very predominating feature for somebody. Well, thank you. I appreciate your thoughts on that. So that's it for this one. But I was kind of curious to hear if any of you had started to think about Akito or had thoughts for Akito's behavior, and if there were any things that you would want to look into after seeing some of that interaction.
There was something Shigure said at the end of the last episode. I cannot remember the specific word, but it was about what Akito would always say that Yuki is doing. And then Shigure was like, well, who's really the one doing that? And I think it was something
like
about like
himself.
Yeah, diluting, exactly. Yeah. And I think we see that because Akito's fooling himself into thinking that he cares for these people, or at least that's the impression I got when he like goes to say hi and he's like, I love you all. But obviously that did not seem genuine at all. But he's kind of like fooling himself into that state of mind almost.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sort of, we see a very stark mismatch of Akito saying he loves everybody, but then the way he has treated everyone. Liz, how about you?
I was just gonna say, like, I kind of put like that maybe Akito some like would maybe have like major depressive disorder or like some sort of personality like disorder, like just the way like, because I felt like there was like a lot of projecting, like I don't know, like that's just kind of the vibe I got. But those were like two things that I wrote down, especially because like in that dark room and stuff, like it just seemed like also that Akito was very like deviant and like very revengeful. So I don't know if that would maybe translate into some sort of disorder.
Yeah, he certainly seemed very vindictive, and I agree with you about projecting, for sure. Jillian, I know you've seen a little bit more than some people might, and I love that. So let's hear some of your thoughts.
I think Akito displays histrionic personality disorder, maybe another one, but I think it's that one because he shows he's very attention seeking. And I just looked it up and it says inappropriate seduction behaviors, which I feel like he did display to other characters like Shigure. But yeah, I think he's very attention seeking.
Yes, certainly. Very attention seeking. I think that we could have a pretty wide differential for him. I think histrionic could be on there. I think narcissistic could be on this differential, antisocial as well. I won't spoil too much, but he can become very, very violent in later episodes. And maybe even like borderline as well. I think that these are all things that would be good things to keep in mind. So if you continue to watch the show after we finish this, I would definitely say to consider some of those and look into them as you're watching. All right, did anybody else have any thoughts or questions before we wrap up?
I just want to say one thing, and that I think like these are really awesome. Like it's very like I just want to say like it's very helpful to like visualize it. Like I feel like this has really helped me, and like even applying it to like the movies we watch and stuff. So I appreciate you putting in like the effort to do this, because I'm a very visual learner, and this helps me learn it like a lot and help me like improve my skills in diagnosing characters. So I just want to say that.
Well, thank you so much. And thank all of you for taking the time to participate and listen. And I appreciate all of you speaking up during class. That certainly helps a lot. So thank you guys. And I hope that you have learned, at least from this, sort of to keep a broad differential, especially at first, and to really kind of go through point by point and really kind of evaluate, whether a character would be or actual patient would be meeting full criteria rather than, jumping to kind of initial gut reaction. So I think it's always important to take that step back and remind ourselves of full criteria and think through the full picture of what a patient or character might be experiencing. So thank you guys so much. I've appreciated you all participating, and I hope you guys have a great end to your semester. Enjoy, and
Thank you,
feel free to watch
Shelby.
more Fruits Basket.
Thanks so much, Shelby.
Good luck.
Shelby.
Thanks. Bye, guys.